Yeah, that's a really good question, Amir. And I'm not sure anybody's asked me that question before. Um, Here's what I can tell you. I can't. It was an evolution. I'll be really honest. So there wasn't a singular moment. I mean, I can tell you, lightning struck in my brain October of 2003, going, "Wow, that is cool." Um, but it was truly an evolution because back in 2008, 2009, 2010, we literally had nothing.
So it gives me great pleasure to welcome onto the Sports Dentistry podcast this week, Adam Bartsch. Thanks for joining us, Adam.
Hey, it's my pleasure to be here with you guys. Thanks so much for the invitation.
So recently, over the last few years, I've got to know you a little bit. But for any of our listeners that maybe haven't come across yourself, can you give us a little bit of background to yourself? You're from a sports science background. Why did you choose to go into sports science? And then how has that led you down the road where you find yourself working with lots of dentists these days?
Yeah, for sure, John, and nice to see you, Amir, as well. So my background is I am a mechanical engineer by training. I grew up in a household where there was a lot of sports being played on the East Coast of the United States. So I really loved sport. I liked school. I was pretty good at math and physics. Father's an engineer. He was an engineering professor at Cornell for about 45 years. And mom's a nurse. So there was an intersection kind of early on of health sciences and mathematics and engineering. And I always wanted to find a way in my career to marry those things up. I initially thought if I could go into, prosthetics and orthotics and artificial limbs and whatnot, that'd be the coolest thing. And as I got a little bit older, my path went a little different way. In grad school, I got into some automotive engineering projects. So, in a field called injury biomechanics. And so from that point, that was around the turn of the century. So I'm dating myself. My kids, here in the States, the phrase they use for me is unk. I don't know if it's for uncle or just unknown or whatever that means. But yeah, in grad school, I worked on some automotive engineering safety projects dealing with human response to injury. And in 2003, I was a graduate student. I was a master's student, actually, at the Ohio State University in Central Ohio, USA, in Columbus. I got a chance to go to a conference, the STAP Car Crash Conference, which at that time was in San Diego, California that year. So it was October of 2003, close to Halloween. It was on a Sunday, actually. They had a workshop before the actual meeting, which ran, Monday to Wednesday. I presented my work, which was totally forgettable, on ligament injury in car crashes, which if you're worried about that in a car crash, you're in good shape. You know what I mean? So I didn't know any better. So I gave this talk that was forgettable. And then I sat in the audience and, about an hour later, there was a talk by a guy by the name of Stefan Duma, who now I think is the Dean of Engineering at Virginia Tech University. And a guy that you all might know is Steve Rosen at Virginia Tech has done this laboratory testing, not just on instrumented mouthguards, but on helmets of all types and varieties. So Stefan was Steve's advisor. And at that time in 2003 was the first ever dissemination of head impact data from a sensor system. And it was in American football. So they had taken accelerometers, stuck it inside an American football helmet. And I was lucky enough to be in the audience that day where they presented on the first 1,500 sets of data. I don't remember what the outcomes were of that talk, but I remember the question and answer at the end. And there's a record of this. So somebody could go fact check me. I'm going to get this mostly right. But the gist of it was, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this is really cool. I really like this. It's way cooler than what I was doing. And this guy by the name of John Melvin, who was this PhD scientist, had worked for the Big Three Automotive in Detroit for a number of years. Just really, just kind of like the final boss of engineers in transportation safety. He got up and he just said, hey, have you ever thought about, sensors inside a mouthpiece? He goes, that's the best coupling to the head you'd ever get. Obviously, because, you put it securely on the teeth. When the teeth move, it means the head moves. And you measure it. And so at that time in 2003, they weren't doing that. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. And of course, going back to the 60s and even 50s with Colonel Stapp himself, the namesake of the conference, people had been trying to measure head accelerations with bite blocks and bite plates, not really mouth guards, but things you would hold on your teeth. You fast forward, I don't know, just say 10 years later, I bumped into a colleague of yours, Dr. Dan Brett, who runs Sports Guard Laboratories in Kent, Ohio, Northeast Ohio, not that far from where I was in 2003, and a lot closer to where I was in 2010 when I had matriculated to the Cleveland Clinic. And from that point, roughly 2010, I was working with a small group, a couple of neurosurgeons, a guy by the name of Ed Benzel, who any of your listeners who know anything about neurosurgery, he literally has written the books on that. Another guy, his fellow, Vince Meal, who was at the time was an amateur boxer, ringside physician. He was interested in, hey, could we come up with a check engine light for boxers in the ring? And then, of course, Dr. Brett, and then a guy by the name of Sergei Samorazov, who was a Russian-trained engineer who came to the group after working on the Space Shuttle Columbia reconstruction. It's very strong in vibrations and physics. So we assembled this. It's like the Avengers assembling. It took a little bit, but we really got to work with nothing but an idea to bring forward the concept of monitoring head impacts through a mouth guard or mouthpiece or gum shield, whatever you want to call it. For these purposes, I'll call it mouth guard. And at the time, I'll shut up in a second here. At the time, the idea was for an instrumented mouth guard, lowercase I, right? No intelligence in there, just a data logger, just a thing you'd put on your teeth. It would move around. We would get some head impacts. We'd get a bunch of other junk, on, off, drop it in the gym bag, whatever. And fast forward 15 years, it's kind of like the overnight sensation, 15 years in the making. So now it's truly an intelligent mouth guard, which can register a hard impact with confidence, which has always been the missing link for this kind of technology, even going back to 2003, that very first talk. And you talk to any engineer about this topic, you got to have quality data from head impact, and you got to screen out all the non-head impact stuff. So here we are, and it's been a little bit of a long, winding road.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So from that first concept in 2003 and then conversations that you were hearing, was it 2010 when this project started with the group in Cleveland, or was there like a build up until that time?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I mean from 2003 up until I got to Cleveland Clinic 2006, was kind of dabbling with some colleagues at a company called SCA Limited. One of my first mentors, a couple of guys, Dr. John Weekle and Mr. Doug Moore. They're engineers. We were working on head acceleration monitoring with bite plates. People would be drooling everywhere. You got a 10-meter cable sticking out. That's how everybody did these things. So got a little exposure there. Wrote some, again, okay papers, but just kind of conceptually saying, here's how you do it in one person. In 2008 in Cleveland, with the help of Dr. Benzel, the chairman of the Department of Neurosurgery, we had some cover then to be able to work on this. And that's when we filed the original provisional patents. And for those of your listeners that are like, hey, I've got this idea, but I'm sitting on it before I file my patent, let me tell you, file it now. Because our patent office at Cleveland Clinic waited 6 months to file it. That cost us, in 2017, 2018, cost us about $2 million because they waited 6 months. Basically, we had a competitor called X2 Biosystems that then we did a deal with them to acquire certain intellectual property as well as electrical engineer like Jason Thibodeau, who still works with Prevent today. I talk to him almost every day. But that 6 month lead time of, not spending a couple $100, that ended up costing Prevent a couple million, actually, down the line.
Due to IP?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, this stuff is all theoretical until you actually have to enforce it. And generally speaking, your intellectual property, it's not like you're protecting the whole world of the scope of your product. It's more so it's to enable you to do what you need to do. And so there was some risk potentially. I mean, lawyers will always tell you there's risk. There was some risk potentially of a priority date there for this other piece of IP, which out of one side of the mouth, they'd say there's risk here. And out of the other side, they'd say, but we're not worried about it. Well, if you run a business, you want to de-risk things. So our leadership at the time made the call to go ahead and effectively join up with X2 Biosystems. I actually just met with somebody in the Department of War now in the United States government. 3 years ago was actually an advisor to X and had a really good chat about what's gone on the last 10 years as they, unfortunately, ran out of money. It's really hard to do this. But we, kind of picked up parts of them and we continue, pushing forward. So it is kind of tough though to reflect and go, gosh, that was 10 years ago. And now my 4 kids are 10 years older.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think one of the interesting things you just said there was, you said overnight success, but overnight success is actually 15 years. So we a lot of people want instant success. They want things done very quickly. They want things done at a press of a button because of things like Amazon Prime and Netflix. You can get everything done like that. But with this sort of brainstorming that you had back in 2010, 2013 to where you're at now, at what point over that 15 years did you feel there was maybe a light bulb moment when you thought, actually, we're really onto something which could really revolutionize how we look at head impacts and how we look at this sort of kind of trend that's kind of going now, certainly with, we can't correlate to concussion, although that's why we're kind of trying to do it. But at what point over that period would you say there was that light bulb moment where you all went, actually, this could be something really, really big?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Amir. And I'm not sure anybody's asked me that question before. Here's what I can tell you. It was an evolution. I'll be really honest. So there wasn't a singular moment. I mean, I can tell you lightning struck in my brain October of 2003 going, wow, that is cool. But it was truly an evolution because back in 2008, 2009, 2010, we literally had nothing. Like I was calling around Cleveland Clinic. There's 40,000 employees, 3,000 physicians and scientists saying, does anybody have a linear accelerometer? The answer was no. So we literally started with nothing other than an idea. To be truthful, the answer is probably around 2020, probably around the time COVID hit, was where it had built enough critical mass to where I started thinking, wow, okay, so we had solved some major hurdles. Remember how I said, the key is on your teeth move, head moves. If it's a large impact, you flick on the red light, send the alert. That's always been, the objective for anybody that's done this. And we were almost there in COVID. And COVID also slowed us down. Company almost died. To be truthful, I mean, multiple times we've almost died, almost ran out of money, almost had the same fate as X2 and 20 other companies that have spent $300 million combined on this kind of technology. So it was around COVID, I think, where really had an opportunity to say, geez, if we could get a few of these things right and we could figure out how to manufacture the mouthguard, in a mass producible way, yeah, we're definitely onto something. And then at some point, I should know this. It's either spring of 21 or spring of 22. I reached out to Anna Falvey at World Rugby because I had seen online, World Rugby has, a small kind of grant program, starter grants. I wrote him, I said, hey, I'm this guy you don't know. We do this impact monitor. I'm just curious, not sure it's useful for you, but I'm interested in more information on your grant program. I don't know. Are we eligible? Like, can you tell me any more? And I think within 7 minutes, I got an email back and it was something like, hey, I was just about to call you. So that was, from the prevent side, that was the start of working with World Rugby, which again, I could not have predicted, where that would go just simply because, it was at that point, it would still be a theoretical.
Yeah. I think that's where instrument mouthguards has really become more aware, the awareness around them is that World Rugby collaboration. But before that, now we've had this conversation a few times, so this is more for the listeners. We've discussed some of the early research that you guys were doing on these sensors, and there's a few interesting studies. There was one, I think, where you were trying to get the team to work, but you had the wires and stuff coming out the mouth that hadn't developed.
Yeah.
Can you tell us that evolution, and maybe like we've even seen it from ever, even since World Rugby's concept to taking it on in 22, 23, how the technology and the sensors has changed in that time. What was it like back in 2008, 2010 when you first were getting up and running?
Yeah, and I
How
run the risk
difficult
of
was
having
that to
your.
get the technology into the mouthguard?
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, John. I run the risk of having your listeners just turn this off now because it'll be so obvious. But back in 2010, so believe it or not, the microscopic, the MEMS, the micro electrical mechanical systems, people call them accelerometers or gyroscopes. These little tiny chips, maybe 3 by 3 by 1 millimeter. They existed back then, and they had a lot of capability. It wasn't like somebody had to invent some new MEMS chip. But what was really going on was, we were full-time researchers. I would say it's never a good idea to have full-time researchers attempt to develop a product. Because when you're a researcher, generally speaking, in my experience, I didn't understand what my job was. I thought my job was to study a problem, not solve a problem. Like this is part to Amir's question about like, hey, when did you know? Well, I had this blocker because I thought I had to do step 1 and then step 2, and the steps had to be super small and incremental. And then 30 years go by and I retire. I guess I don't know what I've done at that point. So part of the problem was early on, instead of just like ramming forward and saying, oh my gosh, let's just build this wireless mouthguard prototype. Well, I made some critical decisions at that time, which whatever, we are where we are. But back then, 2 key decisions. One is to start by building the circuit board out of copper, believe it or not. So the original instrumented mouthguard circuits that have ever existed on the planet were actually built out of copper. I still have some of these. It's like a stick of chewing gum that's populated with these accelerometers. That was one, because we wanted it to be ultra durable. And then the second was the battery was external. Now, I did this because I made an assumption. I made an assumption that our institutional review board would not allow a battery in the mouth. Now, I never talked to them. I never called them up and said, hey, what do you think about this? I just made the decision, which I probably should have called them because they might have said, no, that's okay. You can put it in there. So we had basically 6 wires that had to be soldered onto the copper. Then you have this tail that goes to this little on-off switch with a battery pack. And then you got a cable sticking out of your lips. And then, of course, spit, it instantly gets in there. And I don't know if you know this, but copper and spit don't go well together. So these things would have a lifespan. Really, the lifespan was a day. But maybe you could get them working a few weeks. And then they would just kind of start shorting out and grading, whatever. So we spent years basically collecting data, one person, one day at a time, which was very slow and arduous. But again, I didn't know any better. So yeah, we actually, I mean, there are podcasts out there where there's people that talk about, I don't know what's taking these guys so long. It's not that hard. Well, the hard part, yeah, we were kind of silly doing the way we were doing it in hindsight. But the hard part was really being able to measure a head impact correctly when it happens. And then being able to screen out everything else. And the screen out everything else, plus the measurement accurately of those red alerts, that is the distinguishing factor. And that is like what I've spent the last 15 years of my life working on. And I believe, my opinion, just one guy, is anybody else that's tried this has not successfully done that. They have not been able to screen out the junk, and they have not been able to faithfully report, the 1 in 1,000 impacts that flick on that red light. So again, to answer your question, we're like, we got this cable sticking out. People are drooling everywhere from roughly 2010 to 2015. Got a little bit of money from the National Institutes of Health, which is not easy to get. Took like 2 years to get a couple $100,000. We made the first wireless versions, and believe it or not, guys, we couldn't recharge them. So we charged up the battery, we embedded it in the material, and it was single use. Once you turn it on, it lasts like 8 hours. And then you'd have to dig out the circuit. Then Prevent starts to roll in 2015. I jumped over to Prevent 2017. Then we started doing things like trying to injection mold mouth guards, trying to make custom mouth guards, having the circuit board, be fully encapsulated, have the charging solution. on and on and on. And then it wasn't really until, like I said, COVID, maybe a year after COVID, then we bump into World Rugby. I start bumping into the Department of Defense, where we finally had a product that was close to being ready. And, truly, it probably wasn't like until 2022, 2023, where it could be faithfully deployed. Still had some rough edges to buff out, but, people could use it to acquire, like World Rugby, could use it to acquire the data they needed.
Yeah, because you said that you'd obviously looked at the World Rugby and there was a grant proposal that you'd seen, so you had reached out to them. But also, it's funny that you say they were going to get in touch with you. Now, whether that was going to actually truly happen or not is what it is. But I think I say to John quite a lot that you have to kind of make your own luck by asking the questions. If you don't ask, you don't get. So the fact you sent that email and you got one back pretty quickly afterward, how did the conversations then develop from there? So what were your initial conversations with World Rugby at that time? What were they looking at to get from you? What were you looking at to get from them? I think it just gives the listeners a really good insight into kind of how that relationship developed from nothing to almost colliding together, and now fast forward to 2026 where we were at. So that kind of, again, evolution is a word that we're using a lot here because I think it's the right term to use. So just those initial conversations that you had, what did they ask you? What did you ask them? Just to give us a really clear insight into the thinking process.
Yeah, Amir. Again, great question. So first, I'll say you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? And it's not that I knew in that moment sending this email. By the way, I sent some emails to some other people that definitely didn't respond. Some entities that probably should have, but World Rugby wrote back. So to be fair, just like I was telling you, I don't think I appreciated the potential of what we had, even in an idea form in 2008. Or in prototype form in 2015, or in near commercial form in 2020. And I'm not sure to the extent where it's gone with World Rugby. I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask someone like Anna Falvey or Alan Gilpin that question. I'd be curious what they would say. But suffice to say, if you have no information, then it's really hard to predict, the pathway where everything's going to go until you get some information. And so my belief is, as they, by the way, give them so much credit, they found a way to execute the largest head impact monitoring study up until that point in time that's ever occurred on the planet. They did it in the middle of COVID, and they had us send like 700 IMGs down to New Zealand that Mel Bussey and Danielle Salmon and their team managed to deploy, because I think they were the only people playing rugby at that point in time. So through that adversity, we started getting results, or they started getting results within a week of deploying it. And they basically just, in my opinion, kept saying, we want more. We want more, not more devices, but we just want more knowledge. We want to understand this more. And honestly, I think they were pushing the researchers in New Zealand way more than they were pushing prevent, because I think once they got a taste of what was there, it was, my opinion is they said, oh, this is really going to be useful. And I'm not saying they started the work to think we're going to set thresholds and red lights, tag it into the HIA and whatever. But again, we kind of thought that's where it would go. It's just, we can't, you can't put the cart before the horse. You have to allow it to kind of organically move in that direction. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. If you put truth serum in World Rugby, would they say, yeah, we knew in 2022 this is where it was going? I don't know. But it's been nice to see where it's going. And the exciting part for me is where it's going next, which I think we've got an idea of the single impact threshold. They're well across that. It's the impact accumulation thresholds that I think come next, which are really going to be transformative. And to be honest, Amir and John, it's going to push some people in the States to move faster than what they've been doing with the tech, because it'll just be really difficult to ignore that hard data and hard science. But again, it takes a long time. Amir, I think you said people want overnight success. I mean, World Rugby, it's been a few years now, and they are doing a great job. They're also spread out on 6 continents, so it's kind of, a little tough to manage logistically. But yeah, I mean, it's moving in a direction where they are establishing the basis of sports science, leveraging this tech. Now, they've also done things, again, to be fair, so people understand. They're not using prevent because we're nice guys. We are nice guys, but we have tech that can do the job. So they set the bar where they needed the tech to perform. They worked with folks, industry leaders, people like Greg Tierney, Ben Jones, James Tooby, Ross Tucker, Lindsey Starling. These people, they're making sure the data are correct. They're giving everybody on the planet an opportunity to participate. If they have technology that can do the job, they're allowing the research to take its course. It's just that, been doing this 15, 17 years. So the foundation for the prevent technology and knowledge around helping an entity like World Rugby, that foundation runs so deep. Even if you look at it and say it just looks like a concrete pad, I can do that. Well, it takes a minute, to figure some of these things out. Some of these things can only be figured out once you get to, a few thousand people in the field, wearing these mouth guards.
In sports dentistry, it's not just about treating injuries. It's about optimizing oral health for peak performance.
That's right, because when athletes push their limits, every detail matters, even their oral health.
That's why the Sports Dentistry podcast is being powered by Philips, true innovators in oral health technology.
Philips Sonicare toothbrushes use advanced sonic technology to disrupt plaque biofilm, removing up to 20 times more plaque than a manual brush.
And that's critical for athletes. With high carb diets, dry mouth, and frequent energy supplements, there are greater risk of caries and gum disease.
Philips backs evidence-based dentistry, giving us tools that fit perfectly into performance-driven treatment plans.
So whether you're helping your athletes recover, protect, or perform,
elevate your protocol with Philips.
Yeah, and I think Prevent has shown just the accuracy of the data, which is the big question mark over this. You spoke earlier about being able to cut out the junk and the junk coming in. Give us a bit of an idea of what that is. So, like, what are the types of things that might influence the data from being accurate, where you have to be able to recognize it and make sure that you're not getting these false positives and things like that?
Yeah. The engineering phrase is you got to understand a head impact can be represented as a superposition of linear time invariant harmonics. Said a different way is you got to know signal from noise. And so what I spent a lot of time on before I joined Prevent with my buddy Sergey was literally years really understanding what is signal and what is noise. That prepared me then when I got into the meat grinder of business, where it's, hey man, you can't take a week to analyze that. We're going to sit in a meeting right now and look at you, and you've got 5 minutes to tell us what the answer is. Like, you can't go hide from us. We're going to actually watch you do your computer coding, because we're not even sure you know how to do this. So in the end, you got to have a fundamental understanding of what is and is not a head impact. That may sound like a really simple thing, but I'm telling you, like I said before, there's 20 companies, $300 million that have been spent in the last 15 years on these kind of products. Not all of them have been mouth guards. There's been skin patches, helmets, and headbands. I'm sure there's people that are going to listen to this that are probably working on something right now. But the fundamental flaw, in my opinion, in all of them, is they haven't understood what is signal and what is noise. So basically the easy ones are, okay, you had a football, had a soccer ball, right? It's on your teeth, you head it. Maybe it's 15 times the force of gravity. What the acceleration looks like is it's called a half sine, goes from 0, goes to the peak and comes back down. The width of it is about 10 milliseconds. You blink your eyes, that's 200 milliseconds. So the energy is transferred in 1/20th of an eye blink. It's kind of rounded, right? That's a pretty easy assumption. Most head impacts are like that. Now, if you dropped it on the ground, sharp spike, very light mass, accelerated very rapidly, very sharp spike. So it's like 2 milliseconds. Might be the same peak, but you get the idea. So there's a lot of things that go on that could fool it if you didn't really know what you were looking for. Analogy I always use is if you have like I have my Apple Watch, tells me how many steps I do in a day. Okay. I know it's not accurate. Now, it just depends on what you define as being accurate. So if I needed to tell me 10,000 steps and I look at it and it tells me 9289, I know I've moved, enough that day. I also know there is no way it is correct on 9289. And also there's steps it missed. And also there's junk in there. Well, the intelligent mouth guard today, that's evolved from the instrumented mouth guard, years past, it has to scrutinize, thousands of accelerations. And then it has to pick out, I don't know, the 6 for that day that are actually head accelerations. And then of those 6, it has to know if there's one above the threshold and report that faithfully. Now, keep in mind, there's probably thousands in a day that are above that threshold. So I'll put it this way. If somebody like Whoop had to report their data with the level of accuracy that we do to flick on the red light, I am not sure they would exist as a company, because it would just be so difficult to screen out all the daily junk that is currently incorporated in all of our wearables. But nobody cares, because it just tells me I'm moving more or moving less. But for a single head impact in the wild, yeah, it's a very challenging endeavor. And we get asked a lot, like, wait, why are you the only guys that can flip on this red light? Well, we're not the only ones that can flip on the red light. Anybody could do it, but we're the only ones that could flip it on with confidence and say, yeah, that is a head impact. We can show you 1,000 other things that were collected that are definitely not head impacts.
So when you're talking about flicking on the red light, are you talking about the new development of the LED in the mouthguard, or just the response?
Just between us guys, we've always had an LED. For 15 years, there's been an LED on this thing. It's just that it took World Rugby. They had to go through the right process to gain faith in the data. They had to validate it themselves, right? Independently. I can't be in there turning knobs and pushing buttons and say, yeah, it's all good. It took them a minute, to be confident in it. And then they asked the question, what if you had a light? Could we have a light that would go off in addition to the iPhone Bluetooth alert? I wasn't the guy there. I think this was probably Drew Goodger. So if he's going to listen to this, he'll probably, kind of punch me in the arm when I see him. I think Drew probably said, yeah, that's a great idea. We could do that. And so I don't know. Weeks later, we had the light. They were, hey, we're going to try out the light and turn it on. I'll also say we were going to do it anyways. Our Department of War colleagues, you think about they parachute all the time. They do all this training. Roughly 7% of those parachute landings result in a hard hit, and maybe 60% of those are concussions or have concussion signs. So if you got a couple 100,000 jumps a year, what's 7% of a couple 100,000? That's a lot. And if 60% of those have concussion signs, that's a lot. And these drop zones are miles and miles. So you can't see everybody fall. But what you can do, especially at night, is if somebody comes in and it's on their teeth and their mouth is glowing, or it's in their pocket because they took it off after they hit their head and their pocket's glowing, they said, ooh, that's a great way for us to identify who needs to be assessed.
That's a really good insight into the technology, and you've kind of described that really, really well in terms of how you guys started and where you're at now. For me, as a dentist, what I really want to know is, you've got the technology, now you need the vessel. How did that come about, and how did you then integrate that? You obviously talked about a few challenges that you had about having the wires, but now you've gone wireless and the size of the chip. I want to get a really deep understanding of how you were able to put those together, and who did you need to speak to, and what sort of prototypes did you have to go through? Because I just want to hear about that side of things. That's really interesting to me, because we work so closely with World Rugby and with our affiliations with our international teams as well.
Yeah. And some of this is informed by dental experts. Like I said, Dr. Brett is our dental advisor on these things. Certainly he made every instrument and mouthguard pretty much on the planet up through maybe, 2016, 2017, something like that. So we learned a lot. I learned a lot, I'll say, from working with Dan on that end. And that warm handoff then went to Prevent as, Prevent secured investment with the goal of mass producing IMGs. And I don't mean like making 30 in a day with some Drew formats. I mean like trying to sell 1 million of these things, which again, decent idea, but it just hasn't proven to be that easy. But we spent a lot of time on injection molding, believe it or not. And I'm an engineer. I'm not an injection molding expert, but some of the big challenges there, Amir, were around really in my opinion, around form factor, it was pretty much always too big. And you guys know, I mean, if you give somebody something that they're not going to wear, it's too big, they're not going to wear it. So it doesn't matter how cool it is; they just won't use it. So form factor was tough because we had to go through a bunch of iterations and I guess learn things that I guess now we know, but at the time we didn't. But we went through, I don't know, 3 or 4 iterations over the course of maybe 8 years of injection molding, and even getting to the point where we had these situations where we would injection mold a certain type of plastic because then, okay, this is the soft one. This could be boiled and bitten. It's really comfortable. Then we do all this work. And then I put one from my kid and I look down and air bubbles escaping from this minute hole that's in the plastic, which is like, oh gosh, now we got to fix that tool. So it's been a challenge from the form factor, from how big it is to incorporate the electronics. It's been a challenge with the electronics themselves. I told you about that copper circuit board. Well, these circuit boards are not always designed to have hot plastic being thrusted at these sensitive components off the board. Then you say, okay, we don't want something so hard in the material. Then we need something a little bit softer. Well, then the problem there is you give people, you guys have probably done this, you give people instructions. Bring the kettle to a boil, drop the mouth guard in and count to 30, and then pull it out and put it on your teeth and you bite hard and suck. Well, inevitably, you've got 10% of people, I don't know what they're doing. They either leave it in for 5 seconds or they leave it in for 2 minutes. Thing just falls apart, just a bad experience. So we've been perpetually buffing out those rough edges. And while we were doing that, I think the market was telling us, I'm not ready, guys. The market for millions is just saying, we need more data. We need more knowledge. We need, dental experts on board to say, yeah, this is a good thing. We figure out the business model, et cetera. And so what we did, again, during COVID, kind of went back in the lab and credit, my colleague, Connor Lehman, who was initially hired to help with sales, but has turned into one of the leading custom mouthguard ideators on the planet. He had this idea to basically, make like let's call it a hybrid custom mouthguard. So mass-produced custom that could be boiled and bitten. And I know certainly there's others that have their own products, whether it's, Anthony Lovat and OPRO, they've, mass-produced all sorts of cool mouthguards. But for us with the sensor chip and having something like that then we controlled, because also during COVID, we weren't exactly shipping a ton of product. Innovations like that, then almost, I'm not going to say they're accidental, but it's a function of having an environment that allowed, hey, I got this material, I got this sensor chip, I've got this machinery, and also, let me call Dan Brett, see if this is a good idea. And just kind of iterating through that. I think the future, you didn't ask, but I'll tell you what I think the future is, I think a lot of people know, is in 3D printing. Because, I think that solves as long as you could get the material right, but it solves the quandary of injection molding. And you can make something, as thin and as comfortable as you want. You could take the dental scan directly, and 3D print the mouth guard from there. And there's still, a little bit of work to be done about taking the sensor chip and, putting it in the right spot and then printing around it. And we're not the only ones working on this, but I really think that is the future for this type of product.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I know digital dentistry has really took off, and even if we look at digital dentistry and how you guys have been able to implement World Rugby, because if you were relying on dentists sending you impressions, I don't think it would have been as successful to be able to implement it. And just even the ability to do a digital scan and take the scan and send it anywhere in the world in seconds means that it's a lot easier. And I think 3D printing definitely is a hot topic at the moment in dentistry. We've had this conversation recently just from a mouthguard perspective, even if we're not talking about the instrumented mouthguards, because there's not a real problem to solve, as in the current gold standard of multiple layers of EVA is very effective and it's comfortable if it's designed correctly and it's protective. 3D printing option of a mouthguard, it's more going to make the process of getting the mouthguard easier instead of actually solving a problem of needing a more preventative material or a more retentive mouthguard and things like that. So do you feel, I know there's a lot of interest in the area. I know some companies outside of the instrumented mouthguard space, we're just looking at it from mouthguard space, the likes of Sprintway, I think, are just trying to introduce one now at the moment that's just available in the US and it's coming to the UK. But there's still a lot of nervousness about using 3D printed resins as mouthguards. Do you feel, obviously you've done a lot of work in this space from research to see how it could work, do you think that is the natural next step, that there's a lot of work going on maybe in research and stuff at the moment that we aren't seeing as happening, that this will happen in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, John. I mean, again, maybe we talk again in a few years and it's gone gangbusters, or maybe it's still kind of in R&D mode. I'm not sure. And yes, the resins, that is, a key rate limiter. I mean, I remember talking to Dan Brett about this in probably 2015, where he was, one of the first people I knew who was attempting to 3D print materials that would go on the teeth. I got to give credit to my partner and my CEO, Mike Sjogren, who, I mean, I think to him, I'll speak for him. I think to him, it's always been obvious that is the future. And the only question is when. When is the future here? But certainly, yeah, there's some rate limiters there. And, we have this core technology. We have this ability to make these mouth guards in their current fashion. Conceivably, we have a way to do it with injection molding. But yeah, man, it would be nice to be able to get that scan and then directly print. And there's, I mean, this, you guys know this. There's so many steps then that are just unnecessary. And I think the compliance, the fit, the comfort, all these things are beneficial. The one thing I would say that also goes hand in hand with getting a 3D printed product, I also think is we're probably going to get into, as a business, I don't know if saying we're going to get in the middle of it, but maybe be an enabler. So, for example, to get a 3D printed mouthguard, yes, somebody's got to get the resin right. They got to get the manufacturing correct, put the chip in at the right point in time, et cetera. You've got to get a dental scan. So I think about the little bit I know about having 4 children who are at various stages of Invisalign treatment here in the States. And every time they've been scanned, it's been in the orthodontist office. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about Prevent. John's smiling because I think, he's done this for us. We sometimes have to meet kids or athletes wherever they are. And typically we don't go scan one person, which is what all of my children had to do in the office. We would prefer to scan hundreds all at once. I think that might actually push the 3D printing to go faster, because as soon as these companies that either make the scanners or do the scanning or try to get patients from scanning, as soon as they recognize actually, oh, geez, I'm going to do this Department of War parachuting exercise where they might have a brigade of soldiers and they want the custom mouthguard, that's 3,000 to 4,000 people. They could line them up and get them all scanned in one day. So we're not going to have 3,000 office visits. We're going to have like one visit where they all get scanned. And a similar model, whether it's, some of the work we've done locally. I told you, Drew Goodger's done a ton of work on this, whether it's scanning hundreds of kids by the side of a rugby pitch in California for, a project we're working on, or anywhere else where we're batch processing the scans. I think somebody is going to realize that is a key enabler to getting customers, to getting leads. Then they're going to realize, oh, we have these scans. We've got to make smart mouth guards, or we've got to make night guards, or whatever that we're going to make with that scan. And I think that is probably the driver or the rate limiter to then having the right resin and having all these, other things that are needed to be able to safely put 3D print IMG on your teeth and go with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know Dan is working with James Murphy in Dublin. They do have like a 3D printed resin, and it's probably the only successful one that I know that people use quite regularly. But you brought up quite an interesting name there, as in Invisalign, which is Align Technologies. And
yes,
recently, would this be the first real interest from like large dental companies into what you guys are doing? Because Align's doing a joint project with yourselves at the moment, at the community rugby level. Have you noticed that now you're at the stage where you're getting a lot of interest from big brands like Align Technologies and stuff, and they're starting to think, how can we get into this space?
I mean, I think so. Look, I'm not in the middle of all those conversations at Prevent, but it's natural. I would say a little bit right now. It's word of mouth. So, we got pinged, here and there. We don't do a lot of advertising. We don't have a massive marketing budget. We're not out there. We are not Align. We are not Glidewell. We're not, big sponsors of events to, be getting this word out. We hope to do a little bit more of that in the future. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'd be surprised if any people at those companies would listen to this podcast and then they would be surprised about what's going on. Because again, speaking as a parent, that I've had to take one of my kids about every 3 months over at 7 a.m. to get rescanned just because she was a very difficult case. Nothing against the orthodontist at all. Man, that was a pain in the butt. And that's just 1-to-1, right? 1-to-1 every time. That if I had a different career and I was an orthodontist, I think somebody told me, wait a minute, you can get 300 potential patients in like 1 hour. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I would just do that myself. Maybe I don't need Glidewell or Align to help me with that. Maybe some people listening to this would say, can I get that guy's number? Can we figure out where we're getting all these scans? And then again, as a parent, if you offered me, I know what I'm paying, but if somehow me doing the same thing I would normally do and sign up for a sports program, if there's a dental scan there, and maybe you knock a few bucks off the fee, that is incredible. I mean, I would sign up in a heartbeat, especially if I don't have to go into the office to get that first scan done.
We are delighted to have Ionate as a sponsor for the Sports Dentistry podcast. Are you looking for a water bottle that's built to keep up with your active lifestyle? Look no further than Ionate, the totally leak-proof water bottles with triple lock technology to prevent spills no matter where you're headed. With a simple one-touch opening mechanism, you can sip on the go without hassle. Plus, Ionate's sleek modern designs are not only functional but can be personalised just for you. Made from high quality steel, these bottles are easy to clean and best of all, they're sustainable. From 320ml to 1200ml, Ionate has the perfect size for you, whether you're just out for a jog or going on a long hike. And it doesn't stop at water bottles. Ionate also has travel mugs and flasks to keep your drinks just right wherever you are. Ionate have officially licensed water bottles for the NBA, NFL, MotoGP and British and Irish Lions, so you know you're getting the best. I have been using the bottles for a long time now and cannot recommend them highly enough. So head over to www.ionate.co.uk to get your hands on the best bottles in the business, bar none. Now back to the pod.
I think the opportunity is there. Digital dentistry, we've talked about a lot on this podcast with various guests, and the fact that you're able to take the scanner everywhere. In a few weeks' time, I'm going to be going to scan the Cricket Scotland women team before the World Cup, and we're actually going to the club where they're training, and we're going to set it up, and because we're going to have 4 or 5 scanners with us there to do it, and they don't have to come into the office, as you guys call it, or into the surgery here. And on the back of that, you can also pick up potential clients, or that's not what we're doing it for. We're doing it for the health screening, but at the same time, as soon as you show somebody a malocclusion or teeth on a screen or on a scan, they're like, do my teeth really look like that? Like, yes, we're going to be doing it for health screening, or we're doing it for mouthguards, or we're doing it for the IMG, whatever. But like, actually, can I do something about this? That's the big thing. And I think, like you said, I think being mobile and being able to then take that to pitch side at a training camp or in a school and things like that, and that comes off the back of it. The intention always still has to be about the oral health and why you're doing it. But at the same time, you can say, look, if there's something that we pick up and you're interested to hear about more, then I definitely feel it's a good commercial value too. But that always comes secondary to almost why you're doing it in the first place. Like you said yourself there, if parents come and they say they can get some money off if you do decide to go some sort of treatment, if you are interested in it, then it kind of makes sense for companies like Align Technologies and other companies out there who would want to try and get involved. So we always say to people that if you have got a company and you want the people who invest in you early enough before it becomes a bigger thing, because I like to be loyal. I'm a very loyal person, and I think that people who want to take you under their wing and go on the ride with you, they deserve a lot of credit. And there's been people who have obviously helped get you to this stage, but then I suppose it's hard to then turn around and say no to companies like Align because they're just so big, right? When it comes to kind of partnering up with them.
Yeah, I mean, and look, to be fair, we are kind of making this up as we go. I mean, we're building it at the fly, right? I mean, like I said, we spent all this time on injection molding, but none of us in 2017 said, "Oh, wait a minute, dental scans. That's how you could do maybe the first 100,000 to million. Maybe that's how you could do millions." Because scanners have existed. It's just nobody ever put that in the business case to say, actually, instead of blowing components off the circuit and making a big, bulky injection molded mouth guard, maybe we should, divvy it up. Maybe we should really see what we can do on scanning. And then also, I mean, I think it's just human nature, right? Like I am not one of the orthodontists we've talked to, but I would imagine somebody hearing about us the first time when we call and say, "Hey, could you assist us in San Diego, California?" And then when they hear what's going on, I would imagine it's very different than their day to day, And so some of this is we just have to get, again, I mentioned critical mass with prototypes or with product. There's got to be some level of critical mass. I'll just say in the dentistry world. I know it includes, orthodontists and whatnot, but there's got to be some critical mass of folks understanding what an ING is and does, what the rate limiters are, what the business opportunities are actually for folks that are in the ecosystem where prevents we're just a part of it, but what those opportunities are, frankly, disruptors are in that industry. I mean, there could be somebody listening to this that says, no, that's good. I don't need to go chase customers. I'm good doing one at a time every 30 minutes in my office. That's good for me. They will get eaten by their next door neighbor who's going to say, "Oh, I'll do 1,000 in a day." And so again, this is all like chicken and egg. And it's just perpetually, it's like, what comes first? And just every day we're making progress, and every day, it's growing a little bit more. And I think there's going to be some things that'll happen that I couldn't even predict, on this podcast, that'll just, be, transformative changes, whether it's, a little more work here in the States with IMGs, who's going to be the World Rugby of America to take on the tech, to leverage it for athlete safety. What's the next pivot for World Rugby? Is it into, the community game in rugby union? So again, there's plenty of opportunities. It is a different thing than a lot of these entrenched technologies and methods, as far as I could tell from the world of dentistry.
Well, I would be interested to hear your opinion on future developments. So I know with your sales and event, these are very much focused on having the technology there to look at head acceleration events and just being able to really own that space and have really accurate data that's being used and taken on with the likes of World Rugby. But we're seeing like more and more people trying to use mouth guards to hold technology for other types of things. So recently I've seen a PhD being done, I think in Edinburgh, one of the Edinburgh universities, where they're looking at can they get lactate levels from saliva with technology in a mouth guard. What is the scope for a mouth guard to be able to do multiple things? So like if you have your tack in for head acceleration events, is that sort of maxed out with the technology that can be put into the mouth guard, can be added into the mouth guard? Do you think there is going to be that opportunity down the line where you will have a mouth guard that will have head acceleration events? So I've seen some people trying to look at whether they can monitor wellness in it, or if we want to try to keep it sports related and something positive comes off this sort of these studies that are going into looking at tack and mouth guards to look at real-time data on lactate levels on athletes and things. Can that be added in as well? What's your thoughts on that? Is it very much a restrictive space where there's just not enough room to put that much technology in the mouth guard? Or what's your thoughts just having went through the whole process of development and prototypes and things like that?
Yeah, John. I mean, I think you're thinking about it the right way. Absolutely. The future will include a whole host of metrics. And again, there are people working on this right now, that are, whether it's people maybe exclusively focusing on maybe a anti-bruxism sleep monitoring device, or people that are saying, hey, maybe we could pair, I don't know, heart rate with head acceleration events. I'll say I mentioned a couple of my co-inventors back in the late aughts, Dr. Meal. He's now on staff at University of Pittsburgh Neurosurgery and works with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But his thought early on in the original IP that we filed, You said lactate. Yep, that's in there. You think about any physiological parameter that a medical doctor who takes care of people who also sustain head impacts would want to know. Yes, that was the original idea is, hey, this thing could be a Swiss Army knife. And head impact was one of many things it could do. It just so happened that even though it was exceptionally hard to get it to the point of signal versus noise and red light versus no red light, that was the easiest thing to start with and the core technology to start with. But yes, it will, in my mind, I'm biased, but I think the future is if I have an IMG, if I have an intelligent mouthguard that will send an alert or turn on a red light for a quote unquote like check engine light kind of impact. And it's going to aggregate all of my accumulated impacts. And it's going to have guidance on those impacts, let's say from World Rugby, to say, hey, here's what's too big. Here's what you should do when it's big. Here's what's too many. Here's what you should do when it's too many. Okay, so you've got single impact, you've got multi-impact, done. That same mouth guard, I don't know, I sleep with a night guard. I wouldn't mind, instead of wearing my watch to sleep, wear my thing I'm already wearing to sleep. And honestly, I again, nothing against Apple, but the way I sleep one night, I actually had this thing wedged under my eye and gave me a red eye for 2 weeks. And it just, just kind of the nature of the beast. So if you think about, take the same thing, HAEs and sleep. Take the same thing with HAEs and heart rate. I will say the thing that's hard, we actually got some money about 10 years ago with Dr. Brett, was to look at core temperature. And that's actually really hard to do in a mouth guard. There's some engineering reasons why. It just basically takes a long time for it to heat up and cool down. So it's always lagging in the reading. But yeah, and then if you think about whether it's lactate or blood oxygenation, heck, GPS, there's all of these things that can be done. I don't believe the real estate is maxed at all in any way, shape, or form. It's more a function of, say, from our company's perspective, we're always working on things in the background, always trying to figure out what the next disruptor is, but there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
So
it's quite interesting you said GPS, because when they were first coming out, I was sort of having conversations with a few coaches about them. And the first thing they said was, oh, that'll be able to replace the GPS. Yeah. I was like, no, it's different technology. But you can always see the market there for it to be doing GPS as well, which I'm sure
and maybe it's possible. Maybe for the elites, right? There's some model where the elites, they wear, whether it's Stat Sports, Catapult, whatnot. Yeah. That's tried and true tech for them. They use it for whatever purpose they use it. Maybe that's not really the market. Also, that market's really small. Yeah. Maybe it's more so people that haven't had any exposure to this at all, that maybe don't even have exposure to IMGs and head acceleration events as well. I also think it would be nice, certainly we have had conversations where, I don't want to say people don't get it from the standpoint of head acceleration events, but they're more comfortable talking about things that are closer to GPS. And I'll say, especially in the States, the concussion word and head impacts, sometimes it can be very challenging. Whereas I think if you talk about more, whatever you want to call it, GPS or performance, people are, I think, more comfortable with that. Yeah. Even though I'm really not comfortable talking about my Apple Watch giving me an EKG. I don't even know what that's telling me, but that sounds like kind of serious. And I would want to learn more about what it's doing or not doing. Now, I'm not saying we're going to do EKGs, but you get the idea that there's all these different things you could do. And each person is slightly different. Like I'm guessing you gentlemen, you have a strength in the dental side. So I would imagine you'd be particularly interested in the materials. You'd be interested in the data, but you'd be like, hey, man, this material, you can't poison somebody. You know what I mean? Just like if you were a physio, maybe you want to know the lactate information. If you're an engineer like me, I'm pretty focused on HAEs. So everybody kind of has their own. It's like one giant elephant and everybody's grabbing a different part of it. It's the same beast. It's just everybody has their own little piece and their own little, viewfinder for what they
But it's like technology, like any sort of technology over the years, it advances. Either it gets quicker, it gets smarter, it's able to carry more information. And I think this is probably just a kind of the tip of the iceberg. Well, now with the data coming through with kind of worldwide rugby and with all the games that are going on, the amount of players that are wearing it, data doesn't lie, right? So I think that's what we always talk about. If we are going to introduce something commercially, or we're going to introduce something to me as a parent, if my daughter ends up playing some sort of contact sport, I'd be quite keen to know that not just the one big impact, but it's the cumulative impact, which is a bigger, for me, I think it's, if you're training and you're playing, it's all those things that go together. Obviously, if you have the one big impact, that's more often not as unlucky, unfortunate, but it's all the smaller ones that then become an accumulative thing, where then you can decide, okay, this is what the player or the athlete needs to go. And I think it's a really interesting space, and it's something where, because we work so closely with the elite level, it is, you know, we're seeing it firsthand when we're sitting pitchside at these international games and these professional games, and the noise that these players make when they hit each other and then they just get back up again. And sometimes it's the innocuous ones. That I was working pitchside last week, and one of the South African players just didn't get up from one of the tackles and from one of the rucks, and he's just flying face down. And then all of a sudden it was like, what's going on? And then it pinged and we saw it. And then we had to Hawkeye, we had to go back. But it was nothing really happened. He just went too low, and the opposition player's knee just hit his head. And it was anything, you know. It's not like somebody's gone up to him and punched him in the face, which is an obvious thing. So I suppose my question is this: in terms of technology going forward, you've touched on it quite well, and all the other things with lactate and whatever else is involved. In 10 years' time, where do you see prevent technologies in 10 years' time? Or where would you like to see prevent technology in 10 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's being used in pretty much any area, any sport, any activity where people can make use of the data. So fundamentally, and at a high level, it's contact sport. I mean, that's still the sweet spot, I believe. So there's contact sport and there's military training, which effectively is, you know, contact sport. Those are the places. The difference will be in a decade, Amir, there will be the you remember I said Prevent has this amazing foundation. I mean, I'm tooting my own horn, but spending 15 years working on this, we hit bedrock in terms of the knowledge of what we need to do to produce data. But there will then be another decade of basically research and development around the data, so that those that currently aren't tracking what's happening, let's say with World Rugby or the Department of War or the researchers that we work with, they will have another decade to get up to speed. And it's a little bit like, you know, the idea has to marinate. But this is what I have seen, even speaking for myself in the past. An idea has to marinate for a period of time. I didn't buy an iPhone. I think it took me 6 or 7 years to go, oh, you know, that iPhone stuff actually looks okay now. Maybe I should get one. I mean, I spent 12 years in college and I came to that conclusion. Like, what if, I don't know why I was skeptical. So in a decade, there's going to be some tipping point. And I think in the States, you know, there's some leaders in these contact sport industries, along with the Department of War, that I think will just understand the value of the data, just like World Rugby has really led the way. And, you know, if you just think about it, even if it was every other year, you pick up somebody like a World Rugby, give it 10 years, it's pretty much everybody. And you know, all the elite level contact sport entities. And generally, as they go, then the community game follows. So that would be my anticipation, is that for sure the elites are all bought in after they get over, or after their leadership gets over the hesitancy, where they can. Today, I think part of the challenge is the hesitancy is that they just haven't seen it enough, and they can quantify the risk of doing nothing, which is what they're doing now on HAEs. And so if you can say, well, there's no risk in me doing the same thing, they won't do it. But eventually, you know, somebody will be brave enough to be in a Palby, and to take that leap and to start, you know, relatively small, and then, you know, grow the program. Yeah, long answer to short question, but it should be everywhere in elite sport and should have penetrated a long ways in the community. And somewhere along the line, we're going to get more and more calls, make it cheaper, make it faster, make it smaller, make it better, which we are working on. And, probably the thing we haven't talked a lot about is making it accessible to people where today, to be honest, probably isn't accessible to folks that, even if it's only, let's say, $1 a day, even if it was 50 cents American a day, there's plenty of places that could use it where that still isn't an accessible price point, even if the data are valuable enough. So that's probably the other piece of this is finding a way to get it into places that even if it was very inexpensive, still that might be too much for them to pay.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, Adam. You've been so generous with your time coming on and giving us a great insight into Prevent and IMGs as well, and how that's developed. And definitely we have noticed, as Umar says, we've been helping out with the Scottish and Irish players, and we have noticed even in the last few years, since 2024, like I was with Ulster Rugby at the weekend, and just the acceptance of it's just now just their normal part of the pre-match medical. It was like, is everybody signed up to scrum? Is everybody who's won mouthguards, who's not? It's almost where 2 years ago there was that sort of resistance for this new technology and new thing, and now it's just common. It's just partial of it. So I can only imagine what it's going to be like in 10 years. So it's thanks very much for giving us that insight of how we've got to where we are today, and I'm sure we'll catch up within the next 10 years. We can see if you've projected correctly.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And John and Amir, it's been my pleasure to be on with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Adam. That was great. Really enjoyed that.